And my apologies to anyone who's been waiting to watch us live on YouTube. We started a few minutes late, just ended our first public comment period. We may have time for a second later in the meeting. We'll move on to item number 5 now, which is our reports from representatives. We have Ann Corman joining us via Zoom. We have Mary Bouchard joining us in person for the first time in a long time. So why don't we let Mary go first?
Okay. Yeah, sometimes the sound quality is a little iffy in the Zoom meeting. So that's, I figured, yeah, I'm close enough. Anyway, the town is in the beginning stages of our budgeting process for the next 6 weeks or so. We'll be involved with that. We passed a Title VI policy, which is a non-discrimination policy on the basis of race, color, or national origin, which is required for programs that are receiving federal funding. And I guess our bookkeeper, Blitzy, who works for Newfield, found themselves in a federal audit, and this was something that they were missing. So we decided to pass this policy. We are considering using some of our ARPA funds to replace pavement in the parking lot. And at our last meeting, we had a presentation by Andy Hillman on permeable pavement, which would allow water to go through. And you could also plant trees in the parking lot. So we'll consider that once we have some information on cost. So the other thing that's going on, which you probably are aware, one of our board members a couple of months ago said, things are pretty quiet here. We need an issue. So be careful what you wish for, because now we have two big issues. One is the purchase of the land on Craft Road. And it appears that we had it was subject to permissive referendum. It looks like we had enough signatures, although the lawyer has not adjudicated on that yet. But I imagine it will pass. And so we're looking at a public vote, like maybe November, December. I'm not sure why it's so far out, but maybe we want to have some information sessions and meeting with people to answer questions, because there's a lot of, as with anything like this, there's a lot, the rumor mill gets churning, and, you get people having wrong ideas about what's going on. So just to clarify things for people. So that's the first issue. And the second one is Teganic Inn, which is, wants to build a large, tear down the buildings across from the restaurant on Gorge Road and put in a large 3-story building with 75 rooms and a spa and fitness center. And so that's raised the ire of some of the neighbors. Currently, that is in the planning board, who are considering permitting development district, which would give Teganic Inn a lot of leeway in terms of what they could build there. To my knowledge, it's been tabled, or maybe they need more information, but it has not been decided yet. Okay, I think that's it. Anybody have any questions?
No, I'm really glad that there's going to be some information sessions on that, because I know personally I had a bunch of questions, and luckily Ben and I were talking the other night, and he answered a lot of those questions, but they weren't questions that I had heard out in the public about how that was going to happen or proceed. So I think that would be great, because I think maybe if some of those people that had signed that petition had heard that information, maybe things might have been a little different, so.
Yeah,
That's
well,
great.
it's gonna proceed pretty slowly.
Right.
Right now, we're just talking about the land purchase. There's no plans, they're not gonna build anything probably for at least several years, so there's a lot of time to plan. To get something that will satisfy the majority of the population. But we're getting a lot of feedback, both pro and con, so it'd be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Any other questions for Mary?
Okay.
Thank you, Mary. Ann,
Thanks, Mayor. Would you like the sales tax numbers?
sure.
Okay, so the second quarter of 2023, the county was up 4.01%, towns and villages up 6.2%. And there are some predictions that the economy may flatten. You've probably been hearing that for the past year or so. And then if so, sales tax, of course, would probably flatten. So we're being cautious in our projections for, let's see. What was the first half? Just read this through. You might have heard a notice from our health department that I'll see if I can pronounce this correctly. Legionellosis is a bacteria that's it's a Legionella bacteria. And since June, we've had at least 12 cases identified in the city of Ithaca and the town of Ithaca, and 1 death reported. It's not contagious, but they are looking at different causes of that, and that so anyway, they're looking at different sources around the county and trying to rule out, or at least clean different cooling towers and different things like that. Large hot water tanks, could be large plumbing systems that could come from hot tubs. So anyway, we're working with different agencies or different municipalities and institutions to try and make sure we're ruling out causes for that. So the next thing is we had some real estate issues going on for probably quite a while. You might have heard about. We've finally decided to sell. We bought 2 different sets of properties to look at putting a new center of government in downtown Ithaca. And so one of the a portion of one of the properties, and they're all on Tioga Street, within about a block and a half of each other. We've decided to sell the one that's more in the residential area, at least the house on that property, because it's in a historic district and a residential area. So we've decided to sell part of that property so someone could actually use the house for something and keep it up. And we were looking at starting engineering designs and estimates for a center of government on the other block where we already have some buildings, the county administration, the courthouse, the legislature, board of elections. So on that next block of Tioga, closer to downtown, the downtown part of Ithaca, we're looking at putting a center of government there. And next up is broadband. And the county looked at several options to help look at serving those areas where people either don't have service or they don't have adequate service, which is under 100 megabytes per second. It's not considered adequate internet. So we're looking at different, we've been looking at that for at least a year, maybe 2 years, on how to help those areas. And one of the things we looked at was doing county, so municipal owned from the county service, broadband service throughout the county. And our estimates came back that it would be between $100 and $150 million for us to do that. And also when we talked to our consultants, if we did do that, what would make financial sense to be able to keep to start the system up would be we would start in the populated areas. And so then that didn't really make sense to us, since it's the areas out in the rural areas that are hurting now, and that would postpone trying to get out to those rural areas. So we went with a lesser $7 million plan, where we just put out an RFP, a request for a proposal, for contractors to give us some idea of how they could do the infill those areas. And then we would look at also supplementing that. So that would be about 4 million for the contractors to do. And then we would supplement that with probably almost 2 million in grants that are we could probably get, which are available right now. And then that would leave about $1 million for the county to put in for that. Next is Tompkins County Public Library is going to be closed from September 15th through October 2nd they're doing some energy efficient upgrades to their HVAC system. And then next, the Office of Employment and Training, Workforce New York, is inviting folks in any stage of recovery. Try and open this up so I can read it. Let's see, we're having I can't read the whole thing. We're having though the upshot is we're having a program where they can come and talk with different agencies about how to get back into the workforce. But I can't open it up right now to get the date on that. Next are through the committee that I chair, the Planning, Energy and Environmental Quality Committee. We're going to be talking Monday about with Cayuga Lake Environmental Action Now, CLEAN. We're going to be talking with that organization because reportedly Cargill, the Lansing salt mines are up for sale. And so we're going to be talking about what that could mean, for this area. And that's the 18th, if anybody wants to come to that meeting, Monday, the 18th at 10 a.m. And lastly, we're getting into the thick of our budgeting for next year. And on the 19th at 5:30 at our legislature meeting, our county administration is going to present their proposed 2024 budget to the legislature. And that's actually pretty interesting. If anybody wants to catch that, you can watch it on YouTube on our channel. And it really talks about where does your money get spent and where are the things we're looking for, the challenges we're looking at for next year. And that's all I have. Oh, one last thing I just remembered. Roran, you had asked 2 things last time. I sent you a belated email earlier today on one of the things about folks, municipalities that are broadcasting their meetings. So I sent you a link to that. And then you had asked about the cameras, the security cameras going up around Ithaca. And I think your question was the city of Ithaca going to have input on where those cameras were going to go? And I asked at our public safety meeting a week or so ago, and nobody knew at that point, because they said they hadn't gotten that far. So I suggested that we do work with them on that. And then I also asked Jorge Defendi, one of the city council persons for the city of Ithaca, and he wasn't sure on that either, but took the feedback and and asking that. I don't know if that's where you were going with, but that's what I would like as far as it makes sense to make sure that we're taking feedback from the city for that. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Ann. Any questions for Ann? Well, thank you much.
Thank you.
Item number 6 is reports from this board and the clerk and treasurer, starting with myself. We have in the Dropbox The printed draft Trumansburg Deer Management Program outline for the 2023-24 season. As everyone I expect knows, this is either the 9th or 10th year that the Trumansburg Deer Management Program has been active. It is a DEC. It is a program that requires DEC approval to allow for a hand-selected group of bow hunters to hunt deer within village limits on pre-specified plots of land, which have been voluntarily made available by the property owner. Everything is substantially the same as in previous years. We have since September of 2014 was when this started. Harvested nearly 400 deer from within the village limits. And we have not had a new estimate done in the last few years, but our estimates are still that the deer population is closer to, I think it's still in the 90 to 100 range. Folks who know more about this than I do suggest that you should have anywhere from 10 to 15 deer per square mile. Seeing as how the village is just 1 square mile, that's a lot. That's a lot of deer. So this is something that needs to be submitted to the DEC. And so if there are any questions, I'm certainly happy to answer them, but I would entertain a motion to approve the Village of Trumansburg Deer Management Program for 2023-24. So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions? It does run from September through the end of March.
I appreciate that the deer here are only slightly more wary of humans than the ones in the Poconos that I ran into. They don't give any hoots.
Oh, there's parts of Ithaca that are horrible. They're just
Yeah.
laying in people's front yards and having babies.
I
It's a
threw
lot.
a rock towards the deer and it just stared at me.
Oh, yeah.
What?
It's-
What?
Is that all you got?
It's like,
Yeah, it's just. it is
like, I'm
bad.
calling your bluff. You're not actually gonna throw it at me, so I don't care.
Only we could get the domestic cats to go after the deer.
There you go.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, then all in favor, please say aye.
I,
Any opposed? Okay. Next item is not as complicated as I'm going to make it sound. Actually, it is fairly complicated. We will be holding an informational meeting sometime in October with the organization that was formed in collaboration between the town of Ulysses, the town of Covert, and the village of Trumansburg to negotiate with New York State Parks the management of Camp Barton when State Parks acquires the property. So we're going to have an informational meeting. There hasn't been a lot of information put out other than brief updates since February of 2022. So we're coming up on 2 years in this process, and we will be having a full-blown informational meeting sometime in October. What's before us tonight is that the organization that was formed is referred to as a local development corporation. That is a standalone not-for-profit entity made up of the 3 municipalities who each nominate or each appoint 2 of their, actually, they don't have to be board members. They appoint 2 representatives to the local development corporation to represent that municipality. That organization was stood up in April or May was the official date. We've had meetings every month. And we have bylaws. We are at the point now where we're in dotting the I, crossing the T portion of the licensing agreement negotiations with state parks. And it came to our attention that the way the bylaws are written, technically, it can be argued that the licensing agreement itself would need to be approved by each of the individual municipalities, not just the LDC board. that is both problematic and not a great idea, because it's pretty technical. And the last thing that I want anyway is for 3 municipalities with 5 board members each and their attorneys to start trying to hash out a licensing agreement that basically comes from on high in Albany. There's 70% of it can't be negotiated. So this resolution is something that our attorney, the LDC's attorney, put together to satisfy the terms and conditions of the bylaws while allowing for the LDC to do its job with respect to the licensing agreement. I won't read, or maybe I will, it's not that long. So I'll just read this resolution and then we can discuss it after we've moved it, assuming we get it moved. The resolution reads, whereas the towns of Ulysses and Covert and the village of Trumansburg, having collectively engaged in discussions with the state of New York concerning an opportunity to manage certain real property known as Camp Barton, here and after the park premises, for public recreation and other purposes, subsequent to the acquisition of said property by the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historical Preservation from the Baden-Powell Council. And whereas the towns of Ulysses and Covert and the village of Trumansburg determined that it was in the best interests of the foregoing to jointly form a local development corporation as defined by New York State not-for-profit corporation law. And whereas the Board of Trustees in the village of Trumansburg, having considered the proposed certificate of incorporation and bylaws of the Three Falls Local Development Corporation, the LDC, approved the execution and filing of the certificate of incorporation and the adoption of said bylaws on February 13th, 2023, which certificate of incorporation was filed with the Department of State on March 17th, 2023, and bylaws are in full force and effect. And whereas the village of Trumansburg, together with the towns of Covert and Ulysses, is a voting member of the LDC as such term is defined in the bylaws. And whereas pursuant to section 3.07 of the corporate bylaws, the voting members must approve inter alia any transaction involving the purchase, lease, license, exchange, or other acquisition by the LDC of any assets. And whereas the LDC is currently negotiating a certain municipal park management agreement by and between the Three Falls Local Development Corporation and the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historical Preservation, which park management agreement is the contractual vehicle by which the LDC will acquire management rights of and to the park premises, and which must be approved by the voting members in accordance with section 3.07 of the corporate bylaws of the LDC. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees designates Gordon Hart, village mayor, to be the village's authorized representative on its behalf, and is hereby authorized and empowered to vote in the name of and on behalf of the village of Trumansburg as a voting member of the LDC for purposes of approving the park management agreement without additional further approval of the village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees. And I would entertain a motion to accept that resolution. So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Town of Ulysses will be addressing, or we'll have this before them tomorrow night. Town of Covert has this before them as we speak, I hope.
The one thing just to add quickly is that we'll probably also need to revise our bylaws at some point. Just to keep sort of in the back of your mind, this is not a sustainable way to make decisions, right? If each time something like this comes up. So obviously we don't need to do that right at this moment, but just to sort of file away for future.
Yeah, we will be bringing LDC bylaw revisions, which would need to be approved by the individual members of the LDC. We'll be bringing those to you here in the next few months. But for now, this allows us not to hold up the whole show with parks over the need for municipal approval once the licensing agreement is set.
I'll just say from my point, I kind of anticipated this was already how it was going to work, so I don't see any problem
Yeah.
with this resolution.
That's
what we all do.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that's what lawyers are there for, to tell us when we,
Tell it that the other lawyer was wrong.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Revisiting this doesn't open anything up for like Seneca County, who was interested in jumping in last second, right? This doesn't.
this part does not. No. Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, terrific, one down, 2 municipalities to go. The last item under my report is first, thank you to John Ulberg, who served on our village planning board for a number of years. I don't off the top of my head know how many. I want to say it was 12. I should know, and I apologize to John, who's probably not watching this on YouTube, but I apologize to John for not knowing how long. But a thank you to John for his service on the planning board. He has moved out of the village, which of course means that he can no longer serve on our planning board. And he did formally resign that position, that seat last week. John, for those of you who don't know him, is one of those individuals who doesn't have to raise his voice to be heard. He's very calm. He brings a certain level of calm, I think, to any conversation. And in particular, during the more tense discussions regarding the approval of the 46 South Street project, I thought he was an extremely steady hand during all of those conversations. So thank you, John, for your years of service to the village, and wish you all of the best in all of the years to come. What that means for us, for the village, is that we have a vacancy on the planning board. As with all midterm vacancies, the appointment authority is mine and mine alone. I do not have anyone in mind at the moment for the seat. I am open to suggestions. And certainly if anyone hears this and is interested in serving on a planning board in the village, you do have to be a village resident. I would entertain volunteers. Because I don't think there's anything coming up immediately before them, but we'll hopefully have John's seat filled here in the next couple of months.
It's a wicked good time, just saying.
Yeah. We have roped in many a person by saying that there's not much going on right now. We should sit on this board. I think that's how we got.
Hey, it's great.
All right, and thus concludes my report. So I will hand it off to Marcia for fire and TACC.
Fire, just want to let everybody know that they are having a golf tournament on September's,
This Saturday.
yes, this Saturday, September 16th. I thought we were in October already. Save me. Okay, it's this Saturday, September 16th. I think there's still a couple of spots open, so
2 spots.
there are
left.
2 spots left. So if anybody wants to go,
It is
raise money for our fire.
It is a full tournament. I will just jump in and say it's a full tournament. There's a lot of local businesses have donated and sponsored. And all of the net proceeds do go to the Trumansburg Fire Company. So if anyone's interested, there are a couple of spots open.
And I also want to commend them for a great parade, fireman's parade. My grandchildren thought it was amazing. It lasted 40 minutes long, and they may not even have to go out for Halloween this year. They just sat there and collected buckets of candy. But anyway, it was great. There was some discussion brought up that they might want to change the day. They said they had a hard time getting certain people to participate in the parade because Groton also has their fireman's parade the same night that we do. So a lot of people that would have normally come here, or maybe other people from out of town that would have come here and participated, had already committed to the Groton. So they're thinking about that anyway. There were 22 calls for this month, and he said 4 car accidents in September already. So one of the trainings, they did high angle rope rescue this year, which they this last month, which they needed to use. And they had their MBA training, but they also had a truck check night. And it just so happened that they were all there very late. And the night that they were there, a man was having a heart attack and he pulled his car into the fire department. And at the meeting on Wednesday night, he and his family came with some sub trays and some condiments for everybody at the meeting. And he was very emotional and left a lovely card, just saying that he felt he wouldn't be alive without us. So he commended our rapid response. They got him right to the hospital and he thanked us for saving his life. So that was pretty special. So other than that, there really weren't anything else going on. They did mention that CMC is back on COVID precautions, full COVID. There were no incidents as far as the fair goes, and I think that's pretty much all they had, and there was nothing for chamber.
We have that tiny little piece of business that request approval to spend 15,024.
I thought-
We didn't, we're just gonna clean it up. We didn't get that officially approved because there have been some questions.
Oh,
So
okay,
I have all the words for you.
okay,
Ready?
yeah,
Jerome quotes in there.
yes, it is. So we had a Jerome quote for the fire equipment, which included fire gloves, particulate hoods. The fire gloves were $950. The particulate hoods were $1,050. There were boots, 4 pairs of boots for $1,224. And coat gear for $2,950 for a total of $15,024 that I need approval to come out of the fire equipment line.
You're moving that?
Yes, I am. I'd like to move that for approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Do we have any comments or questions?
We're squared away. The last time it was, we thought we'd already pre-approved some and whatever, and we got that all squared away.
We were missing the detail.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
And there's money to do that.
Right.
Easy peasy.
That sailor is rolling his eyes.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, then all in favor of approving the Jerome Fire Equipment quote for various pieces of turnout gear, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Any comments or questions from Marcia? EMS Youth and Street Tree Advisor.
So I'll start EMS calls, 15 in Covert, 7 in Hector, 5 in Interlaken, 3 in the city of Ithaca, 1 in the town of Ithaca, 4 in Lodi, 5 in Mecklenburg, 5 in Newfields, 1 in Ovid, 1 in the village of Ovid, 1 in Romulus, 22 in the village, and 40 in the town, which is 110 calls, which is a lot. A lot of calls.
Seems like I'm interrupting a lot, sorry.
That's fine.
But I don't, Ben doesn't have to reread those numbers. Everything you heard in that list, other than Ulysses, Covert, Hector, and the village of Trumansburg and Mecklenburg, was out of district.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Romulus, city of Ithaca, town of Ithaca, Newfield, Ovid, Lodi,
And why do we go to Romulus?
because we have mutual aid contracts in Seneca County.
Because there's Seneca County. Okay.
And primarily because 5 Points is a problem.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And actually,
It's a
we'll
local
have a
issue.
chance to come back to this later when we look at the budget. You'll see the mutual aid numbers pulled out specifically there, and it's hard to stomach, but definitely worth emphasizing. So the next thing, I don't know if I'm going in the order of the agenda, but the next thing is a permissive referendum for the Tahoe. So I mentioned at a couple board meetings that we transferred Chief Nelson's Tahoe from the police department to the EMS department. It is now outfitted Actually, it was briefly outfitted as an ALS, a full response vehicle. Now it may be BLS. I'm actually not sure. But in any case, it's outfitted as a first response vehicle. It's been used, I think, to great effect. We've had very few calls turned over, and in large part that's due to having a way to respond that's outside of our usual way.
That's primarily if Joel is on duty at the time, or how do we
No.
staff that? We're
So,
fully,
well, Joel is, I think, still working on how to do it best. So right now it's being staffed, he's assigning people to take it, people who are sort of in the neighborhood, right? People who could respond, but aren't necessarily on duty. When he is on the clock as an administrator, so there's a crew plus him, then he would obviously be the person to take it. But right now it's really in flux, and it's sort of what's the best right now. So sometimes it doesn't go out, sometimes it can't go out. But he's still very much trying to figure out the best and highest use.
So eventually we'll have numbers that separate that car out, so we'll know.
Oh, we
How
could
much
pull
it's
those now. I mean, I don't have that now, but
No.
we could pull that now fairly easily.
Joel is on Zoom if anyone wants to ask.
Oh, geez, I
specific
forgot.
questions.
He's probably pulling up that report now. Joel, if you want to chime in, feel free. But one of the things that I also really want to emphasize is that to me, this sort of harkens back to a conversation that we once had with the town of Ulysses in particular about having a 4-wheel drive capable vehicle for snowy lake roads, things like that. So one of the things that you all remember is that a couple months ago, we approved a cabinet that would go in the back. That cabinet folds down, and so you can transport someone short distance, obviously not on a highway, but you can pull someone out of their, up a steep snowy driveway kind of a situation. So this solves, I think, a lot of sort of pre-existing problems, also helps smooth things that weren't necessarily problems, but could have been optimized. So I'm very, very excited to do it. All of that is just background information. What we really need to do is transfer the money from the EMS vehicle reserve, so that we're not shorting the police department, as fun as that sounds. But in any case, I was moved that we approve, subject to permissive referendum, $15,000 to be transferred from the EMS vehicle reserve account. That's it.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second,
Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, then all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
So the next piece that I just wanted to give a brief update on, really, I don't have an update on this, but I just wanted you all to know that it's still moving, is the fast chargers that are hopefully going to go in someday, somewhere. We are still waiting on a master contract from BEC. It's been several months at this point. I haven't gotten any clear answers on why it's taking so long, or what the holdup is, or if the holdup indicates that the program may not go through this year, or if there's any broader concerns, or if it's just the slowness of the BEC. I honestly don't know at this point. We did rewrite our budget to go from 50 kW up to 120, which is a much more effective rate of charge, just in terms of someone commuting or on a road trip or something like that. So I'm very pleased kind of with where we are, what our plan is now, but we can't do any of it unless we actually get the money from PDC. So all of which is just to say that we're still waiting, but we are, actively waiting, let's say. The last thing I'll mention is that we added our youth commission. The youth commission, because the fiduciary agent of the youth commission is the town, our town budget year impacts the youth commission. So like EMS and fire, it's also budget season for the youth commission. We put our budget together at our last meeting or finalized it, and it looks like we would be assuming and asking for a 2% increase in the contribution of the village. So that's where we are.
Did you want to go over the striker quote?
Oh, yes, geez, thank you. This is what I get for not looking at the agenda as I'm talking.
I am.
Oh, hey, Joel's here. Joel, do you want to give us a brief rundown of the striker quote?
Sure, I can. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Ultimately, we're looking to replace some of our DME equipment. They are very expensive, but frankly, they're expensive for a reason because they also assume liability if something happens. Our stretchers, power load systems, and our stair chairs at this point are past their service life, which means we cannot get service quotes for them. So they won't repair them. Everything now comes out of our pocket. That includes liability. If somebody falls or gets hurt and it's related to the stretcher, we own that responsibility. It's kind of one of those built-in things from the FDA. So it's come to my attention after doing a little research, finding out the age of our equipment is some of them over 19 years of age. The money I'm asking for is a lease to own, essentially. So we will make 5 years of payments at a certain cost. And then after that, we will buy each piece of equipment for $1. And then it also gets us back into the FDA timeframe. So we're actually covered and insured and off the hook.
So the one piece I would add is, you may remember from our last budgeting season for EMS that I increased the equipment line. And I believe when we were talking with the towns in our joint meeting, I mentioned that this is a line that we're going to have to bump up fairly quickly over the next coming years. Joel and I had sat down to sort of do our replacement planning for some of the bigger pieces of equipment. And realized fairly immediately that we had this hole. I think it is an inescapable reality sort of the industry that we have to do this. It's an unfortunate thing. I am grateful to Joel for putting in the research to make this kind of more manageable from a financial point of view. But it is unfortunately, my preference obviously would be to wait until we have a new budget year and we can build this in, right? But I think we're sort of stretching it along because of the payment structure, so we can fit it in this year and then take bigger payments for the next year. So it is an unfortunate reality. And I think, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, that what we need is a motion just for you to sign this contract, and then we can move forward from there.
That is, yes, we're going to accept the quote from Stryker for the 5-year lease. The annual payments are built into the proposed EMS budget for 2024. And there'll be a line item, so it's not a reserve spend. So yes, it's a motion to approve my signing the it's a motion to approve accepting Stryker's quote for the new stretchers at the quoted price, and then simultaneously authorizing me to sign any contracts associated with it.
Okay, so I move that we accept this quote and authorize Oregon to sign any contracts associated with or necessary to execute the quote.
We have a motion, do we have a second? There's a second. Any comments, questions? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you.
There's I don't know, right? The other one's please just has a EMS symbol that in the logo, so I got confused.
Oh,
The Admiral,
yeah.
special vehicles there.
So that actually covers it. We'll get back to the budget further down.
Okay. Ben, DPW water sewer CPCR farmers market.
I'm gonna keep this short this week,
Wow.
month, whatever we are at. I don't have much for farmers market or DPW water sewer. I will just say on the CPZR front that the CPZR has released a draft short-term rental law and an FAQ document. They're both up on the website. And the CPZR's next monthly meeting, which is next Monday in this room at 6:30, will be a public forum to discuss that draft, hear feedback, answer questions, so on and so forth. So I'd encourage anyone who has opinions, thoughts, feelings about short-term rentals and the regulation to try and join via Zoom or in person. That reminds me, I'll have to, yeah, I can do it through there. Anyhow, so yes, that's the big thing there. Information can kind of pushed out again on the website via the email and various news sources. I'll be on WHCU talking about it on Thursday as well, I think. So looking forward to that, but otherwise that's all of my update.
Wow, we get to have that second public comment period ever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, police, Keith.
Everyone hear me okay? Sometimes he's
Yes.
Yeah.
wired headphone. Sometimes these wired headphones just let the ambient noise pour in. Okay, I'll just start with our report for August. 116 calls of service. One criminal investigations included 1 fraud, 1 trespass, 3 domestics, 3 harassments, larceny and theft, and 3 motor vehicle crash investigations. So that's that. One thing Chief is starting to look into is, unfortunately, Sergeant Peters's career is coming to an end. He's going to retire in December, and so we're on the lookout for someone that we can put in as a new sergeant. And so that's something Chief's starting to look into. Talk to some folks about. Along those lines, we were pleased to receive word from New York State's Division of Criminal Justice Services that our agency has been found compliant with the mandatory certification program, which is an important piece of hiring now in New York State. So Chief is very excited to hear that and make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing there as far as the state's concerned. Ben, I was going to talk to you about this. I think Chief is looking to do some permanent no parking signs along the new sidewalk on Union Street. And I'm assuming that would be kind of a DPW task.
I mean, I think the right way is to put that into the traffic law, and then
Okay.
if Chief wants to suggest that, I think that would come to us to put in the traffic law and then pass, and then they can put, and then DBW can put signs up.
Okay.
But we'd have to go through that process.
Okay. All right. Then he and I can work together on that and get that to you. Thank you.
Yep.
One other thing Chief wanted to mention was he's had some, I guess, some issues with the AC unit inside their office, and he because supposedly they're supposed to be serviced every 6 months, but he feels they haven't been serviced since they were installed. And he found someone cheaper to do it than Snug Planet. Didn't know if that was okay to move forward with. Basically, he found somebody that's willing to do it for $75 per unit every 6 months. He said Snug Planet's call outs are $300 for the call out, $150 an hour thereafter. So he thought that was a lot more expensive. And so he's looking for, I think initially just $500 for AC unit repair, which is for the call out, inspection, parts, labor. I think the question was there, that's something we can move forward with. What is the preferred budget line for something like that? Is that out of the police budget? Is that out of the more central budget?
Should be out of buildings contractual for the whole office building. So they shouldn't be serviced separately from the rest of the building.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was one of the bigger questions was.
So if we can get, we should get more than one quote, but if we can get a couple of quotes, including this one, in writing for ongoing service for the whole building, That would be
Okay.
helpful, and then we can approve it. If we get it in time, we can approve it at the end of the month.
I would double check warranty information as well, just to make sure we're not voiding anything by having someone that they have the correct certifications or whatever is necessary.
And then the main thing that we needed to do was the permissive referendum that's in the Dropbox. That back up now. To make the initial payments on the 2 leased Tahoes for the sum of $24,163.99. I would move that we do that.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. So we approved the purchase of the Tahoes at our last meeting. Actually, these are leases. But Chief does want to spend it from the reserve line. So once we pass permissive referendum, this money will actually refund our general fund. Any questions or comments on it? Hearing none, then all in favor, please say aye.
I
Any opposed? Okay.
Lastly, for police, you'll see 2 quotes in the Dropbox, one from Admiral, one from Bush regarding the outfitting of the new Tahoe and Chief's vehicle. Chief would like to go with the Bush quote. It's the cheaper quote.
Remarkably similar.
So the Chiefs do.
Yeah, so I think and he says Bush is more reputable, so I think it's around 14,000 to outfit the patrol car and around 6,500 for the Chief's car. I think I wasn't totally clear if that a referendum is required for that purchase.
Yeah, it just depends on what line we're taking it from, Keith.
I'm pretty sure he needs 15 or 5,000 from the equipment reserve to complete the
Good.
that was his last email.
So then we can approve the purchase of with the quotes, but then we'll need a permissive referendum for that reserve.
5,000 from the equipment reserve.
Yeah. Yeah, so Keith, if you want to move it, you can approve the quote from Bush Electronics, or you can move the approval of the quote from Bush Electronics for the outfitting of both the new Tahoes. One for the patrol Tahoe, the quote is $15,325, and the Chief's vehicle is $6,235.
So I would move that we approve the spending on the new Tahoe and the Chief's vehicle.
Have a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
Any questions, comments?
Yeah, this was all part of that initial amount that we had discussed previously between the 2, the lease payments and the outfitting. This is just kind of formalizing this expenditure.
Any other questions or comments? If not, then all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And then I guess the last thing we need, Keith, is a motion to spend, you said up to $5,000 from the equipment,
Or it's just vehicle.
Vehicle reserve.
Yeah, the reserve.
from the vehicle reserve
Outfitting.
to complete the cost of the outfitting. Or something like that.
I would move that we spend $5,000, up to $5,000 from the vehicle reserve line for the balance or completion of the outfitting of the Tahoe Chief's car,
Subject to permissive referendum.
subject to permissive referendum.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? There's a second. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
And unless there's some ETC updates, the ground is Green Team met with the DPW as we get closer to breaking ground for the pollinator garden at kind of the water tower space. Just a reminder that this project is grant funded. And keeping with the comprehensive plan, underwent several iterations presented to the public at Board of Trustee meetings before final board approval. I also want to add that to make the distinction between what's happening now and what the plan is for the larger green space. The plan for the larger green space does not have a plan, and that will continue to be talked about with public input at forthcoming meetings. And they will be announced. Those forthcoming public meetings will be announced on the website soon. So if people go by that area and see shovels in the ground, it is not because there is a plan for the larger green space. It's simply for the pollinator garden that we received a grant for. Also, there was the AIDS cycle ride came through Trumansburg over the weekend and utilized the farmers market, and was the route was reviewed very favorably, and as was the farmers market for being used as a pit stop for the riders. They actually went right by me, and I wasn't totally sure what it was, and now I know. Thank you, Jessica. So we're becoming the bike race capital of New York State. Between that and the gateway to beverage country, we got a good thing going here. We just got to be careful not to combine the two. And I believe that's it. Oh, and I don't know if we made this official, but we do have a date for Winterfest, which is December 2nd. So you can put that on your calendars as per usual, the first weekend of December. So, there you have it.
Okay. Any questions for Keith? Okay, Treasurer's Office.
Okay, so. There is, it'll be up in either this forthcoming newsletter or next, but there is a Rotary Student Reward Contest. People may have seen the posters out and about, but they just really want to get a little bit more attention towards that. So check out how you can nominate a qualified student to win some funds from the Rotary to further them in their college tuition goals. We mentioned the A's Ride for Life. I have a note that I'm supposed to ask if we're thinking we're going to put the garbage contract out to bid. And if I should move forward with that. Yes. Awesome.
It's usually done. Yeah, October-ish.
Okay. Great. Speaking of October-ish, the clerk offices and the codes office will be closed for the week of 9/18 for training and staffing realities. We put an announcement out on Facebook, and it will also go in our newsletter. So everyone who needs to get your in-person action happening this week. I am resuming Williamson Law Book training and accounting this Thursday. So this is a busy week. I will not be available next week. What else we want to know? Water payments went online. We're seeing about the anticipated amount of usage that we thought we would based on people who had previously paid online. It's successful. We are collecting the data of how long it takes to upload a batch instead of the payments. We have identified some top priorities for our next 6 months, one of which is to get an online payment station in the offices in time for the November billing cycle. There's no real reason why that can't happen except for time. So that's kind of exciting. Do you want to say anything more about online water?
Well, that batch uploading is
The bomb.
nice and fast.
Is it flowing?
It's flowing. It's flowing.
And we did actually, we did announce it, but Tax Glance is also live on the website. So you can go to the clerk tax field and you can look at your tax bill based on the location, or if you know your tax bill number, you can see what you paid. Anyone can look, this is all public information, and you can make payments. So we've actually received 2 online tax payments unannounced that service was there. So that's pretty exciting. And I actually don't have any more announcements, but Jen, you might have something.
So next week I'm going to be at the NICOM Fall Training School. So looking forward to learning more about the world of clerks and municipal water handling. So that's going to be a really interesting training session. Also, we did get an accurate inventory of our assets from our new IT company. So I'll be discussing that with Roden and Jess this week. But just looking at what all we have, what the age of the hardware is, and it's going to help us make sure that we're getting the right number of licenses for all the staff here.
Yeah, hot on the list is getting Microsoft 365, so we can have better integrated workflows for all of us, including, budget cycle stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, updating our Outlook will be really nice for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's about it.
If anyone wants to know what our other projects are, you're welcome to email us and we'll or I can take a picture of the whiteboard.
Right.
Just wrote up. That's that.
Love a good whiteboard.
The whiteboard.
Hey, anything on the clerk side of the house?
Sort of threw that all in there. So that was a maybe one title.
Gotcha. Okay, item number 7 is old business. First item being the TAP stands for Transportation something. It's a big federal grant program that only comes out every 2 years. We are intending to apply for money through the TAP grant cycle when it's announced. It's not been officially announced yet. It's part of the federal budget cycle, which we're still in. But it is anticipated that there will be TAP grant funding available this fall. We are planning to apply for Main Street sidewalk money through that grant. Part of the grant requirements are that we go out for RFQ, which is request for qualifications for engineering services. You can't just use your engineering firm that you always use. You have to go out and see who else might be interested. So we approved the RFQ last month, published it in all the appropriate places that those engineering companies look for. We actually had our bond counsel, our fiscal agent, Municipal Solutions, do much of that for us. We received back 1 response from MRB Group. And it's in the Dropbox for anyone who doesn't know anything about MRB Group.
Or wants to see very young pictures of our friends
Wants
at
to
MRB.
see Bill Davis circa 1989. So I would entertain a motion then to accept the.
Thank you. That's brilliant.
So there's no quote for services with that. So I would entertain a motion to approve the use of MRB Group for engineering services related to the Transportation Alternative Program grant cycle.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments on it? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Which brings us to second item of old business is a revisiting or not just a revisiting, and discussion among the board on the conversation which was begun last month on the different options this board would consider supporting for lot dimensions in the draft zoning revision. I'll turn it over to our CPZR chair for more.
Sure. This is, continuation of what we were talking about last month. There is,
Do you want to log in?
I can do that. Would people like to see that?
I don't have a way to share it.
Yeah, I can do that. Quickly, give me a second. That link here.
That's you.
Myself, I think we're good then, and then I can. There, share. This one. I think we'll that is good enough.
It's pretty good.
So this is the same chart that we were looking at last month. I have added some additional information that we discussed and were asking about last time around. That information is the number of lots beyond just the percentage of lots. And I think we all kind of said our piece last time around. So I'd actually open it up for any conversation here that the board wants to start off with. I'm also happy to just kind of propose something, but I think I'd rather have us chat first about where if there's any other further conversation or comments or questions.
Any comments or questions from the board?
There's not much to add to what I said last time, I think. This piece at least, nothing new.
I mean, I guess maybe I can say one thing, which is, I know I'd sent an email around, but just to say it out loud, I did come across housing information for the county from 2019 to 2022. And there was a 40% increase in median home price in that time. That's nearing $100,000 increase in home sale price. It just continues to underscore the real, like, frankly, dire kind of housing situation. And I do, throughout this whole process, we've heard quite a bit from, and I've thought quite a bit about retirees who are looking to downsize, young families that are looking to move back in the area that maybe grew up here and can't find a house. People that have their children at the school and are forced to move out of the district and take their kids away from their schoolmates. There's a real affordability problem going on. And for me, that pushes me towards more flexible zoning in hopes to do that extra increment. We're looking at the number of lots here, and between the different options, you've got like 100 more lots from D to C. You've got another 65 or so lots from C to B. I think, clearly not all of those are going to change or be subdivided by any rate. But I think every incremental amount, some percentage of that is possible. And when I think about this, I think about where are we going, over the next 20, 30 years, and who's going to be able to afford living here at that time period. So that really does push me towards that option B, to give that extra flexibility. And again, this isn't forcing anybody to subdivide their lot. If they don't want to subdivide their lot, they don't have to subdivide their lot. This is just allowing people who might want to welcome in a new neighbor, who might welcome that income or that reduced tax overhead by selling off some of that land to stay in their home, to be able to do that. So that's where I land on B. But I guess I'm kind of restating the stuff we already went around.
Yeah, I'm a C.
Any comments, Ben?
I prefer it to be D. But somewhere between C and D would be great.
I'm just real worried that that doesn't get us to addressing the actual issue, to be honest. I mean, I think C will probably help. And, I'm still strongly a B, but I think going much less than that, it runs a real issue of not kind of addressing the situation that we're facing really.
I guess my thinking is the majority of the people aren't going to subdivide their lots because I think the people live in the village for a reason. They want elbow room. I respectfully disagree with Mr. Hannon when he said that people expect density in a village. Otherwise, they live in Hector. Hector is where you hide the bodies. It's not where you live. If you want, if you want space. So I just think that, I don't want to hear my neighbor flush their toilet when the window's open in the summer. I don't want to hear your argument or anything else with you and your spouse. So,
For us, it's just yelling at our kids.
that is for the majority of us.
We won't repeat the Hector comment Thursday night.
But yeah, I think there is an expectation of privacy. And I don't think 40 would do that.
I think the reality is that there's an expectation always of the status quo. When you move to a place, you move to that place as it exists in that moment, right? So like we all are grown. So the idea that the status quo will have like an anchoring effect on your perception of where you are is not earth shattering or different. I think what Keith is after is that in a relative way, the village is more dense than say Hector. And I think both of those things are true. It's just the relative weight that we give them.
Right.
And the reality is that we're dealing with very foggy numbers, right? How many people can we allow to subdivide versus how many people actually will? What is the purpose of it? I believe that if we eliminated subdivision regulation altogether, I would be surprised if 10% of the people that could subdivide did, even if that was everyone. I don't think it's a thing, but that's really not the issue because we can't guess that is not really an effective way to do it. Right? It's not helpful to say that, I don't know, in my hypothetical world, this or that could happen. The question is, what do we allow? And so to me, I think that 50, I don't disagree with Marcia. I would hate moving up a little bit, like to a 60-foot situation, a C.5 or something. But fundamentally, I agree with that. I think if we want to move the needle at all, we need to do something. And I, for one, would like to do that. So,
I just don't feel that whatever decision is made between 40 or 50 is going to solve whatever problem we're looking to solve.
it absolutely won't, but it also won't create a whole nest of right. It's also not, the sky will not fall either, right? We are not on a knife's edge. No. We choose one way or the other. We are in a very fuzzy, right? I think
the majority of us that are for all that elbow room, and I think the most of the people that disagree with cutting the zoning to ridiculous numbers of 40 and 30. I think everybody has a fear or a vision that just all these places are just going to pop up all over the place. We're going to speak on this really super dense place. I don't think that's going to happen. I think to build one of those places, number one is income limiting, as we've seen with the rise of how much it costs to even build a doghouse around here. So I think a lot of it is fear. I think a lot of it, but I also don't think it's going to. I think eventually Trumansburg is going to become a very expensive place to live, and that's just plain a reality. And I think if we make it, I don't think we make it 30 or 40 feet, that's going to solve that problem. I don't think it's going to put more kids in our schools to solve a problem.
I think when we say these things, on the one hand, I agree, but I think the reason when I think about why is that I think it's a difference of time scale. I think over 5 or 10 years, nothing's dramatically going to change. But I think when we think about zoning, I like to think about what's happening now and in the next decade, but then what's happening at 20, 30, 40, 50 years, 60 plus years down the road. And I think that is the scope of history. I mean, we were talking about this last week that, roll the village back 50, 60 years. Most of Penn Ave wasn't developed, right? We were in a very different place. It happened slowly, it happened iteratively, it happened over time. Never, I mean, not never, but like very rarely at any one point did that feel dramatic or overblown, right? But people went from Penn Ave and having lots of elbow room, hectare level open elbow room, right? To now having Penn Ave, which is more elbow room than Wig Street, but is less than hectare, right? And this iterates over time. The problem that we have right now is our zoning is basically prevented the next logical iteration of housing to happen in the village. And to me, what I'm trying to look at it getting here, what can we put in place now that lets the village continue to iterate and evolve over time, where it's an extra house next to you, an extra house over there, 2 more years later, it's another house over there. And I don't think it's going to be fast enough to address the housing pricing issue that we're seeing, right? I do think you're right that it's going to get expensive. But it also, if we keep it locked in kind of amber, as it were, it's absolutely going to be expensive and it will not continue to evolve. And these places need to evolve. That's just the reality of how a village works. And so I think by moving towards that smaller area, we start seeing, so we've got Wig Street and it's fairly dense, and then like South Street's kind of dense by it and it gets a little less dense out, then we start see South Street kind of fill in, and maybe Penn Ave, and then some areas around, on your area neck of the woods, like these houses start to slowly grow, and slowly at some point in 50, 60, 70 years from now, maybe Wig Street, that level of density is over in P's area, but it's happened incrementally and it's allowed more people to move in the village, and it's helped kind of offset that growth in housing costs that we're looking at. Again, this is now everyone's opinion. I'm kind of painting a picture, and people are only going to kind of each have their own picture in mind, but I'm looking for that flexibility to allow that iteration, which we honestly have had a lot of over the course of the village as a whole. It's only now that we've kind of locked it in stone because we have zoning that is not really representative of the village, and we've kind of built out all the obviously open areas. So if we want to keep building towards that, and I think we can. I mean, there's a world in 100 years where Wig Street feels like Fowl Creek, and somewhere down Penn Ave looks like Wig Street, and we've kind of built that density organically over time. And the people that move into Ben's point are going to love it for what it is then, and they're not going to know what it looked 100 years ago.
Right.
But as an organization, as a community, as a dynamic kind of situation in the village, we've allowed it to evolve and grow to that next level of density so that it can try and manage this cost inflation issue that we're running into. And it's not going to prevent it or roll it back in any way, but it is going to make it slightly more livable over time, and certainly much more economical from a village standpoint, because it doesn't take more water mains and more sewer mains to put a house between 2 existing houses. All that infrastructure is already there. The streets are already there. All that kind of stuff already exists. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to get, the vision that I see when I'm talking about these things.
Mhm.
So I want to add one thing quickly, which is I think the time, looking at this on a time scale is, and I hadn't thought of that before, but that's a very interesting way to do it. Because with this sort of revision, what we're doing is turning away from the current zoning, which I think if you trace this out 50 or 60 years, what we have is fairly large green lots next to gigantic multi-unit development sites, right? Which is sort of what our community said we don't like. I think fairly loudly in a very divided way, right? Like there's a lot of clamoring and a lot of, it's hard to discern one clear voice out of that mess. But what I'm saying is that I think there was, at least we can say, a level of discontent with the current zoning. And if we take out our current zoning and we sort of stretch that and envision a world 50 or 60 years from now, we have these sort of green pockets of like private, wealthy landowners versus sort of juxtaposed with, I think, a bigger, complexes of multi-unit buildings, which to me is a very unattractive. That to me is the antithesis of a village, right? We may have rural properties, but the village itself loses that feeling of trees and lawns and those things. This to me is a way that we can move forward while incrementally increasing density, but maintain the village atmosphere. it won't be the same. I mean, I think you and I have talked about. this,
Yeah.
Right? I've
I'll
talked
be
about
dead.
this probably with everyone. We're like,
I'll be dead, so, yeah.
well, no, but for me, like, when we started down this track, I think about what Trumansburg is, how do I envision Trumansburg? I envisioned Trumansburg before Penn Ave was developed, right? To me, that is the scary swamp that I didn't want to run through when I was, a child, right? So I have this very sort of static vision of the Trumansburg that I really attach to and feel emotions invested in the most. But that's just not reality. And I think that this kind of a proposal where we can start to move towards something different, like Ben says, my kids will grow up with now as their time stamp.
Right.
And so the question is, how do we allow that to grow in a responsible way? Not how do we more effectively cling to the things that like I emotionally am invested in? It's how do we take a practical, because we're a government body, how do we take a practical policy approach to responsible growth? Very
Yeah.
long-winded way of saying it, but I like this sort of time thinking of it in that way. That's very effective for
Right.
me.
And like Ben and I were discussing too, a lot of it's perspective. If you come from a place where there's like I said to him, I live on Halsey Street, the golf courses behind me. I have lots of open space between my neighbors, but the kids can run through the backyards. That was my idyllic growing up when, I was a kid. But I said, I don't think I could ever live on where you live on Wig Street. All those houses are so close together. My husband grew up in Syracuse, house, driveway, house, driveway, house, driveway. That's what I don't want to see here. That's a city. You live in a city, you have a house in a driveway and house in the driveway. When you live in a village, you have a little bit more space. But I said, it's all perspective too. It's all on what your vision of how you want to live is. I wouldn't move on to Wig Street or buy a house on Wig Street. That's not enough room for me. But like you said, as people come in, but if you come from a denser area of a city or something, that's all you see. So that's not, that's not a compromise.
Right.
For you,
So I think because zoning can be so complex, we always get granular very quickly.
Mhm.
But I think there are two, at least in my mind, as I think through these things, there are two separate but related fundamental issues at work. Number one is, it is in fact inevitable that the value of housing stock in the village of Trumansburg will continue to rise, as long as the Finger Lakes remains a desirable place to live. If there was some existential threat to living in the region, that's all bets would be off. But as long as,
Global warming is helping us the other way.
yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I break my own cardinal rule about not weighing in on other municipalities. If they're doing things that might, poison the lakes, those kinds of things are existential in nature to the Finger Lakes. But those threats aside for the moment, as long as the Finger Lakes region remains a desirable place to live, the value of housing stock throughout the Finger Lakes, particularly in those areas that has robust infrastructure and robust services, will continue to rise. That is inevitable. The question is, how fast? And if there's any around the margins, even efforts we can make to either speed it up or slow it down. Should we do anything? And if we think about other things in life which are inevitable, and the two that people always mention are death and taxes, right? Those two, and then maybe there are others, and sometimes it sounds like I'm half kidding, but in this case, we can make light of it, but it's serious at the same time. The other things in life that are inevitable, we as people tend to try to postpone them as long as possible. We try to push them off for as far as possible. No one says, well, we're all going to die anyway, so why try, right? We generally try to push that thing off. So if, and this is where the comprehensive plan is important, if the desire of the community is, as voiced in the comprehensive plan, to make Trumansburg as expensive as possible so that only certain, quote, types of people can live here, and so that folks who already own property here can benefit financially as quickly as possible. That would be one route. If, on the other hand, the comprehensive plan says we would like to have more, which is a relative term, it's not an absolute term, more affordability, then that's a different route. So fundamentally, there are only two directions. Choice D on screen is where we are now, and it is not the fastest way to expensiveness. We could certainly reduce the percentage of building lots subdividable to 0. And we could impose skinny atlas style design guidelines where you're not allowed to have your garage door open during daylight hour. We could force an even more expensive track. Or we could do something that may or may not slow the rate of increase in property values, but at least allows for the possibility. Which brings me to the second fundamental question, which is when we're talking about an individual's personally owned property, there is still in the law and in the American zeitgeist some presumption of personal freedom. And when I look at lot size, when I look at frontage, when I look at setback, and I realize that there's 90% of the village is subdividable and not a one of them is being subdivided, those people are exercising their freedom to do nothing. And if we reduce that requirement, those same people are not going to do anything, but someone else does. And so if given the option between allowing, that's even a phrase, allowing freedom, if given a choice between not restricting freedom versus restricting freedom, most of the time, I'm going to come out on the side of not restricting it. Now, we live in a village where we voluntarily give up some of that freedom when we know there's zoning. But this decision making for me doesn't come down to should it be 40 feet or 50 feet or 62.75 feet, 7,500 square feet, why not 8,000 square feet? How about 9,200 square feet? We're getting, the numbers don't matter when you're splitting hairs between 40, 50, 55, 58, 59. What matters is what direction do we want to have an influence on the village taking. We can't force it one way or the other, but we can have an influence on it. Since 2012, the influence, and I remember those zoning conversations, and it was in the room and it was said out loud. The influence and desire at the time was to have more Larchmont and Tamarack and less of everything else. We were just coming out of, in 2004, the affordable housing behind Salo Drive was built. We had just had the annexation in 2008 of Aubles, and there was a vocalized intent to move Trumansburg in a wealthier direction. Well, we're 11 years in to that project, and the comments as presented in the comprehensive plan are one of saying, can we pump the brakes on the rich part? My words, not comments. And so I don't know, to everyone's point, and I have heard comments saying, well, if you don't know whether it'll have an effect, you shouldn't do anything. That's actually the exact opposite when we understand that this is death and taxes. If you know the direction you're on is one of extreme expense, and I don't have 2023's final numbers, but our median home value in the village is approaching 400,000 this year. So, you know, $500,000 by 2030 is a chip shot. Maybe it'll be 750 by 2030 at this point. If that's the direction we want to go, then that's the direction we can go. But that's not what has been stated in the comment. And so for me, you know, I'm happy to let this board decide or the CPZR make a recommendation. The difference to me between 40 and 50 is not the issue. the issue is something or not. Keith, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I stated my case before, but I mean, I agree with all that. I agree that I think we've kind of talked about I don't like that the tenor of a lot of the conversation comes down to kind of what I would say kind of like a fear out of what your neighbor might do. You know, I don't think that's a good reason to not try to do what we can to alleviate some of these issues, as minuscule as that may be. So I'm not sure what option I'm legitimately in favor of, but I think I would be on the side of being more aggressive than not, because I think if we go with a very modest incremental approach, I don't know how much we'll be able to tell if we actually did anything or it made a difference at all. And so if we take a more aggressive approach and we start to see a little bit of movement, then that's potentially great. If we see it getting abused, we can roll it back. So that's just kind of restating where I was at, I think, the last time we talked about this. But I mean, I think the comment that the village will probably get expensive, I would say it's already expensive, right?
Yeah.
We know it's
Yeah.
expensive. We know like teachers can't live in the village. You know, village employees don't live in the village. We know these things. You know, we know, you look on Facebook, we know people are constantly looking for apartments in Trumansburg. So I don't know. I mean, I think if these things can help a couple people or a couple families have residents in the village, I think it's worth being more aggressive than not.
My question is, what do you need in terms of moving forward? I mean, we could obviously talk about this.
Forever.
Right.
Okay.
Well, so I mean,
What do we need?
yeah,
next step?
practically, right, so practically we need a draft law that we can read in here and then have a public hearing on, submit to the county for review and kind of continue down that path. And so I think the question back to this board again is, what numbers are we putting in there? You know, what do we feel comfortable eventually voting on, obviously barring county review, public hearing, so on and so forth. But I don't want to put A in there if we're all just going to go through the motions and then decide not to vote it, right? So I think
And it doesn't have to be a majority vote, right? I mean, it has to be a
Well,
majority vote, but not everybody has to.
no, that's right. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
to pass the law,
Right,
it
because
will,
it seems to me like there's at least 3 trustees that have a specific number in mind. And that are very similar. I probably don't. I'm probably gonna be the holdout. So I say, let's vote and
I mean, I think-
get something done.
Our way of doing things has traditionally been to seek consensus, I think, for as long as I've been on the board, and I think there's something valuable there. You're right, if we can't, then we won't,
Right.
that is what it is. But to me, it sounds like we're coalescing at least, right, like. We may be split, but it seems like 50 may be something in the middle.
Yeah.
Right, to me,
Yes.
that feels like an achievable compromise, right? I think you and I would probably go a little
I bet.
higher. You two would go a little bit lower, but to
I'm
me, at least, I'm happy to compromise at 50.
50.
I don't see the difference, and I'm just looking at the percentage of building lots, percentage of empty
It's
lots.
very
built.
small, between 40 and
I don't see
50.
the difference between 40 and 50 as being
Humongous.
large enough for 50 to be a compromise of 40.
I mean, we don't have a 60.
What I wouldn't support is some split the difference between C and D. I think C is I wouldn't support A. I don't like the 5-foot side setback. The difference between B and C is small enough that I almost like, You know, if the four of you said it's gotta be B, all right, whatever, it's, you know, it's 40% versus 50% of something. You know, if you offer my kid 40% of the cake or 50% of the cake, they're not gonna cry about either one. But if 50% of the cake is on the table and I say you can have 10% of it, right, there's gonna be a problem, right? So going from 50 foot to 60, 70, 80 doesn't make sense to me because it's not making the effort to change the course of the last 3 years in housing prices. Right?
Yeah,
And given what we've just said about some meaningful percentage of people who could subdivide simply aren't even going to look at it. They want to subdivide. You know, they're going to need a definition before they project it, right? They're not paying attention, some of those folks. And of the one, do I think there's anyone chomping at the bit in the difference between C and D? So we're going to add 99 lots that could be subdivided that aren't subdividable now. Do I think there's anyone in those 99 who's chomping at the bit to do it? Not really. So again, we're back to this granular splitting of hairs between a couple of options that are meaningful relative to the current direction, but not so meaningful in regards to each other. Right.
But for practical purposes, now we need a number to move forward with. Right. And to me, 50 sounds like one that we can
50 sounds well.
coalesce around. And I don't think there's a meaningful difference between C and B. Right, I mean, C is the biggest jump, 99. That's the biggest jump in terms of individual. I mean, it's obviously also 50%.
I mean, the reality is if we do see, and 10 years from now, some other board is saying nothing has changed since 2023, then going to B is not going to make a difference. I mean, they can try it, sure. But by then, so 2033 will be at an $820,000 median home price in the village of Trumansburg at our current base. And they'll say, well, they should have gone with B 10 years ago. I don't know that that would have made a difference. Right now that I'm talking in the past tense.
I mean, when you think about it that way, you do start having these conversations of like, should there be sections of the village there you can have row homes, 0 setbacks? You know, we have them on Main Street, right? Should that be, you know, and I legitimately don't want to open up that can of worms. I think that is a future can of worms, but it is the kind of conversation you start thinking about when, how do you really make a difference? The flip side is you may have to wait for a while until it gets so out of whack that it starts becoming worth buying a house that's in some disrepair and tearing it down and building a lot more on it or something.
Close.
And I think that also is a scary spot to be, but maybe it's not a horrible thing to consider again down the road. I think we are in this weird middle ground where I think we still feel like we want to get towards a half measure of some sort without maybe really turning the knob all the way towards where we might have to really be to start really addressing some of these issues. But that again comes back to needing the financing to work in a way that it makes sense to tear down a house and build 6 row homes or something. And that's a whole other, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the conversation, and maybe some of this is for the public hearing, but if housing affordability was the only consideration, then the answer is Caroline's conversation.
But in reverse.
Right. If you really want all freedom, anybody can build something. We want anyone to be able to build something here at all. You don't have zoning. You scrap zoning. But it's because we are, and I'm not suggesting that for the peanut gallery online. It's because we're balancing the affordability issue with the character issue. Right. That we have this. And I don't believe, and everyone is entitled to their opinion on this, but I don't believe that C or B for that matter will lead to a change in the character of the village, given what's available to subdivide and given the economics of it.
Yeah.
Will it make a difference to housing affordability? Well, that's the hope. Right? We want people to be able to build. I mean, when you look, we should have it, by the way, for our public hearing. when you look at the graph of median home prices in the village of Trumansburg, it was extremely consistent. Of course, there's seasonal ebbs and flows. You got to look at the graph as a whole. It was extremely consistent for 22 years. And now it's on a takeoff trajectory. And that's not a bubble. That's not something that suddenly corrects, because there's nothing to correct it.
Right.
And so if we want people to be able to, I'd love to be able to, I don't like the social engineering aspect so much. I'd like to have certain professions or demographics living in here or there or elsewhere. It's just a very simple. How expensive do we want Trumansburg to be? We can pick on groups. We can say we want teachers living here. We can say we want elderly to be able to downsize and stay in the village, whatever. You can pick your hot button demographic, but it all comes down to how expensive do we want it to be? And again, I don't think there's a huge difference between B and C, but if C somehow feels like it's more palatable and we get more comfort, there is.
That's where my comfort lies.
There's a larger one, maybe it's not in this report. It only goes back to 98.
It might be somewhere in here, but I'm not gonna look for it. Well, let's see if we can.
Let's map it over new.
What's it? So anyway,
Yeah. I don't see that one in this report, but yeah, if you've got that. we can bring it up.
so yeah, I would suggest in terms of process, I would suggest either B or C be included in the draft. I don't know if we can do that.
That'd take me 2 minutes.
You won't be here at the end of the month.
I won't, but I think the plan, so. I don't want to be the one making this decision, but it feels like the thing that will most likely be passable by this board would be C. So I'm inclined to put that in a draft. Hand it back to, I can include it as part of the agenda for next board meeting to be introduced. Formally schedule hearing at whatever next meeting works for everybody. I will be out of town, but it's not a problem for those things to move ahead without me. And then we can run that by county planning and have a public hearing on it.
And I guess the thing that makes me the most comfortable about it is that it's not a tablet written in stone that's going up the Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
It's, what our progression looks like after this is definitely something that's going to be revisited time and time again and can be changed.
I mean, I think to Gordon's point, if this comes up again, because in 5 or 10 years, literally nothing's changed, and we're now looking at 500,000 median home price. Maybe that starts becoming a different conversation that's not even, even talking about A anymore. We're talking about probably something even more dramatic, or at least more dramatic in certain areas of the village or something like that effect.
Because from what I'm seeing and reading, it's not just here. It's happening.
It's not.
Everywhere.
But there is a world in which, right, like if most of the village were as dense as Fall Creek, it would be a different situation, right? There would be much more housing here. It would have a much different impact on the cost of housing, but a much different impact on the cost of managing and supporting a village too.
Right.
And so the question that I don't have an answer for is how do you meaningfully iterate towards that? Knowing that so much is already built out and knowing that so many people don't want to put another house next to their house. And so that's the really tricky part, but that's where, we're kind of back in the same thing.
Right.
But there is a way out of this problem here, and we're here, and I just don't know what the connecting line is. And maybe this isn't it. Maybe it is. I think part of it is going to have to run the experiment and see what it looks like.
I'm going to throw a quick wrench in the gears and just point out that many cities, and we are obviously not a city, so I don't mean to suggest that we do this, but cities fund development directly, right? So even outside of this whole zoning conversation, we can just build houses. Like, I don't mean to be flippant about it, but like there are other mechanisms at our disposal. I think zoning is the gentlest way because it's the way that we can sort of direct demand. And we are in perhaps privileged position of knowing that we have demand to direct. But there are other tools available to us that I think long-term, right? If we're in that 10 years from now situation and none of this does anything,
Yeah,
there are other tools that hopefully we would need. And I don't know that we could, I mean, we're honestly not big enough to go that route. But if we get into a situation where we need row houses, right? And we are, I don't know, there's like a literal fence around T-Berg and people are like clambering to get in, like physically, if we get into that situation, then I think
yeah.
I mean, the town is right now considering a development district of some kind, right? Like there are.
Yeah, I mean,
much
that
more
is-
meaningful tools
That is
that are-
definitely the next lever to pull. I mean, there's at the state level now, you can kind of be, the city of Ithaca just did this pass a resolution that says you're in favor of affordable development or zoning or something. I can't remember what it is. And then you get kind of bumped up on points for applying for grants and you can go down that path and partner with developers to build things. And so like it is a much more active approach and it could be one that eventually, I think we could see ourselves getting into. I think to your point, it is the much more direct approach than the kind of gentler zoning approach for sure.
And it
Hopefully
would
we don't
help.
need to do that, to be clear. I don't want,
Right.
I don't want to.
But it
sound
would
like I'm
help us if
opposing
the
that.
town allowed more development.
See, this is where things get tricky for me, because
'Cause
my vision is that we are a node development. Right? I would like to be able to drive to Ithaca without passing the suburbs on the way. Right? So I would like to focus development here.
Right, but there isn't the minimum
Establishment
two acres?
For the town, I don't know.
I think it is.
I'm not sure, but I
I think it's 2 acres.
For subdivision, probably.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of land.
But I think
But anyway,
Ben's
that's
to Ben's point, I mean,
Right. It is
That is-
beautiful.
right, yeah. But nodal development is incredibly valuable for reducing your time in cars, reducing your footprint, consolidating all
True.
utilities and
Well, and culturally.
culturally too. So I think there's a lot of value in having the density here, even though understandably we struggle with it because it's, to Ben's point, it's only as dense as it was when we all moved here, and we kind of like that because that's when we moved here.
Right.
Now that we've gone down the social engineering rabbit hole as well.
Again,
You're welcome, Roy.
thus it brings us back around.
So do you want us to introduce it at the second meeting this month or at our regular meeting in October?
I would say, I have no reason to hold things up. So I think introducing it at the end of the month is absolutely fine, and scheduling a meeting for any one of our forthcoming board meetings, a public hearing
Yeah.
at any one of the forthcoming board meetings is fine with me.
I will be here for the second September meeting. I will not be here for the first October.
We should seek to reschedule the first October.
So we'll introduce it at the end of this month, but probably won't have the public hearing until maybe the second meeting in October.
That's
Just
fine.
have that in the day.
We were maybe gonna have a public hearing on a code enforcement law. Was that also second in October?
It said, we said October, it hasn't been published.
Okay. We can figure that out. I'd probably not have the both on the same night,
You would
but
not like to.
I don't think that would be great. I think I would keep them on separate days, but we can figure that out.
Okay.
We'll be here on the second. I will not be here.
All right, so you'll take care of that part.
I will do that. I'll send that back around.
Well, I'm- Maybe, yeah, wait.
Intro.
So we are scheduling for the second meeting in October.
We're not scheduling anything. You cannot schedule a public hearing until you introduce the local law.
Right.
We're gonna
So-
introduce the local law on 9/25.
Okay,
Schedule a public hearing then.
thank you.
I'll send along my availabilities for that when we get closer.
Okay, any other items of old business? New business, historic district presentation.
Yes, so, speaking of scheduling meetings. This came up, there was some interest in historical districts, part of that coming out of some of the zoning conversations, part of that coming out of the ever perennial conversation around the historic district for Main Street and kind of the downtown corridor. Historic Ithaca has a presentation that they do somewhat regularly, pretty planned out, that they can present to boards, committees, groups, whatever. That comes in one of two formats, so they can do kind of a 20-minute presentation, or they can do a bit more of an open-ended workshop, 60 to 90-minute workshop where it's a bit more Q&A. There might be some interactive pieces. I'm not entirely sure the format. This came up in front of CPZR, and in talking about it more with Historic Ithaca, they really encourage including planning board, zoning board, village board, anyone that might be involved in a historic district or its adoption or so forth. And so I wanted to bring it here to see if we as a board would be interested in kind of hosting Historic Ithaca to do a presentation at some point this fall, October, November, maybe December, at one of our meetings, either as a 20-minute sort of a thing, or maybe if we're interested in a second meeting of the month, something more freewheeling, or even its own separate meeting altogether, to have this kind of conversation. I think it'd be really valuable for the community and for CPZR, and I think it'd be interesting to have the boards, especially zoning and planning, to listen in on it. So I guess A, first, does that sound interesting? B, do we want to go with a shorter or longer format? And C, do we want to try and pick a date or two, and I can get in touch with Historic Ithaca and see if they can make that work.
I think it
Yes.
sounds interesting. Yes,
Yeah.
Short and yes.
short and yes.
All right. I mean, looking at our now October calendar being booked up, I will talk with them about either of our November meetings, maybe, and see if they can fit the 20-minute in one of those.
Sure.
Okay.
See what their availability was.
Yeah. That was it. Yeah, I was just wanted to kind of get some dates and some ideas so I can move forward before it is already the fall.
Okay. High level review of EMS and fire budgets. What did you want to?
So I just wanted to, I have had, well, Ben, would you mind sharing that spreadsheet that Jess shared around? Just through your email, fine.
Yeah.
Or I assume you can't do that, right?
No, I can do that. Give me a second.
Yeah.
The one that was just sent out.
Yeah, that's,
Years of. Perfect.
so I'm just looking at EMS budget, so I don't think the
So
percent stuff
I
matters.
corrected in Dropbox the source of the document as the last year things.
Oh, I don't,
Let me here.
I
I'll
so I
share.
just want to look at the EMS budget.
I will share what I think and then we can go from there. But I already left, so you'll have to make me co-host again when I join.
My understanding is that none of the EMS budget has changed. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so you can, that's the. Oh, you left?
I did. It'll take just a second.
So we have our meeting coming up. Generally, we go through this as a board before that meeting, but we were just fairly slow putting these together, which is more on me than anyone else. But I wanted to go quickly through it just so that we have a little bit of a preview of what we'll be getting into later in the week. There is also some chance that I won't be able to make it. I'm struggling to find childcare and my childcare has fallen through. So I want to share with all of you the sort of higher, just a couple points that are.
Bring the kids.
Oh my
That is
God.
my-
That would be, on one hand, that is like my dream and also likely a nightmare. But it would be fun. So I'm just gonna go through and talk about a couple lines. By and large, this is a standard. This is what we're used to from EMS budgets of years past.
It may be the flattest EMS budget I've seen
Right, that's true. Actually, it's not what we're
in
used
16 years.
to. That's true.
So
It is. Well, no,
I
there
mean,
was
music to the ears of a lot of
there was one other flat year.
towns.
But in any case, so the big difference here, that first line, you'll see personnel costs are basically not. And the big reason for that, as you may remember, is that last year we had budgeted for a clerk. And Joel has been pursuing the billing, right, that I mentioned, I think, at our last meeting, changing billing services. And we have moved away from the idea of just immediately taking the clerk in-house, and we're looking to get there incrementally. So the services that he's looking for give us higher visibility into what's going on behind the scenes, but don't require that we do it all at once. So that's the big cushion. The other difference is that because Joel and Jess works on putting these spreadsheets together, what they discovered is that Vicky's formulas were by and large not in the spreadsheets themselves. So Joel constructed, basically reconstructed from the ground up the budget using actual numbers rather than sort of the stock formulas that we had been using.
Okay, so I just need to write.
So we are hopefully more accurate as well. And that's not an up or down thing. That's just a statement of general. I don't know, kudos to Joel. There's a couple other lines, like if you scroll through this, like we usually do, you'll notice vehicle insurance is maybe a little bit higher. That's all just actuals. That's what we expect. The other big one is the monitor lease. So that 37,800, then that's like maybe 6 or 7 up from the bottom. Like ambulance monitor lease. So that line, one above that.
There it is. Yeah.
That line is the striker thing that we just addressed earlier. And so the way that striker agreement is structured, we will pay a small monthly fee for the rest of this budget year, and then that will kick in, and that will be a yearly payment. So I just wanted to highlight that. That is another big change. And then moving further down, EMS vehicles are going slightly up. That's really a function of inflation. Also, that $5 change, or 5,000, excuse me, is probably more associated with the new flag car. But those are the big changes. There is really nothing striking about this. Oh, actually, you know what? I should also mention the scuba thing. So that middle line there, that's 1,600 for scuba. That is basically a program that Joel and Nate have been working with the fire company to put together. Basically donated gear. There's a couple things that remain, but it's basically a situation where they were like, we're already doing this, we're already here, so we might as well make it official. I honestly don't know what a scuba team does. But
it's a dive rescue team.
Right, so the reason that it came up is
These happen already have certified divers.
right. So we're basically equipped for it, and they would, drowning victims or potential drowning victims. There is a possibility that they would really come into play, but it's.
And we want to have that as a separate reserve line and not just part of general equipment.
I think mostly just to track it separately so we know if it's being used. And I think honestly, Joel wanted to show how little it was going to cost separately. When we get to the village budget, that'll probably just get subsumed into equipment.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think that'll stay the way it is, but really, I mean, you buy one wetsuit and it costs that much. So I think it's really just to kind of display the amount of work and effort and sort of community goodwill that's happening between EMS and fire that got us there. But those are the big high points. I just wanted to share it quickly, again, mostly because traditionally we look at this budget first. So that's where we are. I don't know if there's any questions. It is what it is from that point forward. So Thursday, I'll give that little talk again, but with Joel to provide detail. And that's really all I wanted to do.
Any EMS budget questions before Thursday's meeting?
I don't plan on being there, just FYI.
That's fine. This year is pretty.
You could send your children over to my house, but it's bedtime, so it's gonna be.
No one wants that. No one wants that. No, I think that this will be a fairly straightforward year, so that's a good one.
Okay, any other items of new business?
Well, what about taking the meeting? Do you want to talk about the October meeting at the end of September? Or should we seek to reschedule now and put this down this way?
Sure. So October the 9th is Columbus / Indigenous Peoples Day. So everything will be closed, at least as far as governmental entities. So when would we like to have our first October meeting? Is everyone available Tuesday the 10th?
Yes.
Yep.
Heath, are you available Tuesday the 10th? Or yeah, Tuesday the 10th. Great, let's go Tuesday the 10th. Wait, one other calendar to check. Stand by one. Yep, Tuesday the 10th.
Okay.
That. Okay, if there are no other items of new business, we are a little ahead of schedule, so I will, Janice, if you have anything you'd like to say. We will have a short public comment period. There's no one online, and only two members of the public here, so.
Ben, I'd be happy to babysit your kids if you would like to go. I think this committee has, the CPZR, or whatever it's called, has totally ignored the parking situation. If you have, let's say that this is the width of the lot, this is probably about 20 feet. Where are you going to park? If it's 30 feet, where are you going to park? If you're 40 feet, where are you going to park? My lot is 49 feet wide, and that allows for a completely narrow parking to go to off the street. As part of my back surgery therapy, is I have to walk 2 miles a day, and I walk all over the village. There are constantly people parked on sidewalks, totally in the street. There is not enough place for people to park when you live in a congested area. So I think you need to very carefully consider what the ramifications are for parking on the street, or even being able to get on the lot in some fashion or another to park your car. And the public transportation is limited. That has been cut back quite a bit since I first moved here. And so I think we've kind of got this assumption that people are going to be able to walk to work or get a bus to work. And I think all of those are fallacies. So I think 50 has to be the absolute minimum so that you can get a house and pull your car off the street. Now, what if you have company? Heaven forbid. Where are they going to park? Catholic Church parking lot for us is a saver. However, they have made it very clear that as long as it's not on Sunday or a wedding or a funeral, you're allowed to park there, but not overnight. Now, that suits me, okay. But what if you do have overnight guests? Where are they going to park? So I think you've totally ignored that factor in saying about concentrating on affordability so that people can afford to move here. But where are they going to park? And we have to admit, we are a car society. This is not New York City. And I'm telling you, if it becomes 20 feet, I'd be glad to move to Hector.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for all considering going over zoning again. I just feel like I need to push back on this overarching idea that the deregulation of zoning, which is basically what's proposed, deregulation or upzoning, that it'll improve affordability. This is the exact opposite of what will likely happen. We have older houses in the village, like older houses that are duplexes that sit on larger lots, like 100 feet wide by 200 feet deep. Currently, under the zoning, that property can have one house. So as someone who's the value of that house is worth what you can get it for it, like the lies are rentals, like duplex. So the value is based on that rental income. If you deregulate too much, that now becomes investment property. And it will be valued based on what can be built on it. This is what happens when places deregulate. Arlington, Virginia, Austin, Texas, lots of places where this approach is taken. What happens is the older houses get torn down, the poor people get kicked out, big new buildings go up. So I hope that we can take that in consideration and think about, as we think about what the long-term implications of this kind of change is, that that's what's going to happen is these older buildings can get torn down. Big new expensive stuff's going to go up. May not happen today, 5 years, 10 years from now, but this is the short road to making Trumansburg an enclave for wealthy people. And that's what's happened in other places. So that's it. All right, thanks.
Any other comments? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss a couple of personnel issues.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Bye.